Hi everyone, Miss Gooch here, and this video will be exploring the poem Remains by Simon Armitage. So Simon Armitage wrote the poem for a collection called The Not Dead, and he said of this collection, "These are poems of survivors, the damaged, exhausted men who return from war in body but never wholly in mind." So it's all about the mental suffering, the trauma that the soldiers carry home from war as survivors. And this poem is about a soldier in a modern war zone. So unlike some of the other poems about World War I in the trenches or World War II, with the sort of battles and in the air and on land, this is about being in another country and being among their civilians and having to deal with that kind of war zone. And this particular poem is about a soldier who's haunted by a memory of killing a looter. So it's a bank robber. And the poem is really about the soldier's struggle with PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Post means after, and a trauma is something that happens to you that you can't forget, something awful that happens to you. So it's essentially the after the trauma, the stress that remains, hence the title of the poem, Remains. So how does this poem link to conflict? Well, the poem explores the lasting emotional and mental impact of war on surviving soldiers, as I just said. So let's have a look at the poem together first of all, and then we'll start picking it apart. Okay, here we go. On another occasion, we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind, so all three of us open fire. Three of a kind, all letting fly, and I swear, I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. Pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body. Then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep and he's probably armed, possibly not. Dream and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds, and the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Okay, so let's have a look at this a stanza at a time. So in the introduction here, he's essentially setting the scene for us, telling us that they've got sent out on this mission to tackle looters raiding a bank, and then one of them legs up the road. And this is an interesting phrase you would have noticed repeated, probably armed, possibly not. So there is an element of doubt that this soldier is admitting to. He probably had a gun, but he possibly didn't. And it's interesting as well to think about how in this phrase here, he legs it up the road. So to me, it seems like the threat is running away from them. So there might be an element of that kind of questioning the decision there as well, because were they really in any danger if this person was running away from the soldiers? Did he deserve to die? Obviously in a war zone things are really intense and you have to make really quick decisions, but I think that part there and this phrase show you that this soldier is really questioning what he did. And then you see that again in this stanza here where he really tries to make it clear that it wasn't just him. So somebody else and somebody else, we all did it, we were all of the same mind, all of us did this. You know, you see that repetition of all. He wants this, the person he's talking to or the reader to know that it wasn't just him that made this decision. You know, that kind of, we all thought it. It's not just me. I'm not the only one to blame here. But then when we move to the next stanza and we see it already here, you know, it is him that is carrying the burden and the guilt on his own. So where it says, I see, they might have all decided to do it together, but it's him that's left with the guilt to carry by himself. And that's quite a powerful image there. I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. This is clearly something that's going round and round his head, and is very, very powerful memory for him. And then he changes tone again. So he says, well, yeah, we've hit this looter, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. And you really see here with this kind of, you really see here with some of this phrasing. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts, and then he's carted off. He's trying to be pretty chill about it, really. He's trying to sort of brush it off, like, no big deal, just one of those things that happens. And we see that quite a lot with, stereotypically in society, there is a sort of expectation of men to be tough and strong and just be able to handle this sort of thing and deal with their feelings. And I think that's what the speaker is trying to do here, trying to play it down, like, yeah, it doesn't matter, not a big deal, we see it all the time, let's just carry on. But then in the next stanza, we see that it's not as easy as that for him, because he says, end of story, except not really, because after that he has to keep walking past the same spot where this happened again and again and again, and just reliving the whole thing. And then by the time that he goes home, it's embedded in his mind. So every time he blinks, every time he tries to fall asleep, in his dreams, he has this memory again and again and again. And then we see in this final line of the stanza here, the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. So that's quite typical of post-traumatic stress, that people turn to drink and drugs because temporarily it makes them feel a bit better, or they think it will make them feel better, but in the long term it's not helping them. And he admits that there, it won't flush him out. Nothing that I'm doing is getting rid of him. And in this final stanza, it just emphasizes that he's here in my head when I close my eyes. So everything he does, the looter is there with him. He's dug in behind the enemy lines. He's not where he's just come from in that sandy and sunny land. He's with him now, and he finishes with that really powerful image of his bloody life in my bloody hands. And we'll pick that apart a bit more in just a moment. So linking back to our central argument of the poet exploring the lasting impact emotionally and mentally on the soldiers, I think that's very clear from what we've just talked about together. But let's take a little deeper dive into some of the language analysis. The opening line of the poem is on another occasion. So there's a couple of things we could consider here. Firstly, it opens as if the speaker is talking to someone. Maybe that's a friend, maybe that's a therapist, but straight away it's clear to us that they need to get this guilt, this memory, this feeling off their chest. They need to share it with someone. This poem is written in a dramatic monologue form, which means a dramatic monologue is one speaker sort of revealing their feelings or revealing something that's happened to them. So you can see that through the speaker of this poem. And the fact that he says another, it suggests that they have a lot of memories like this. So that just shows you the extent of the trauma that they faced. If you think about a soldier who's in a war for, I don't know, a month, if something like that happens to them twice a week, that's 8 instances of death that they've seen, and that's probably a lot more than that. So that is how traumatic this is for him. And then he says, I see every round as it rips through his life. So it's very interesting that see is in present tense, not I saw every round, I see it. So again, it tells you that they're reliving it. Every time this memory comes back to them, they're seeing it again as if it was for the first time. It's in present tense, it's happening there and then. And then the use of this verb rips is quite a violent image. We kind of mentioned it before. And I think that's important because if you rip something, it's very, very difficult to repair. So he's ripped this man's life away from him, and now he can't repair the emotional damage that is done to him. Again, another really powerful image here. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow, and it carries on. So actually when I think about this little comma here, end of story, so we might think that if it really was the end of the story, you'd have a full stop. But the comma here signals that it's not the end. The speaker's memory continues to cause him pain, and we see that through the rest of the poem. And this is a really powerful image as well of his blood shadow. So a shadow suggests that he's being followed by what he's done. Obviously your shadow is with you all the time. So it almost reminds me a little bit of being haunted by something. And I think we can see that he's being haunted by his memories. And then I said we'd return to this final image of the whole poem, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Now, some of you probably already got this link, but it possibly could be a reference to Lady Macbeth, because she helped her husband commit murder and then saw imaginary blood on her hands. And the guilt of that, the guilt of what she did, actually drove her to commit suicide. So this is quite a sad image to end the poem on. Obviously, we don't know what happened to this soldier, but it does end with a suggestion of suicide, which unfortunately isn't too uncommon of a thing to happen, or that soldiers attempt when they have post-traumatic stress disorder. So it really does show the extent of this soldier's emotional and mental suffering. And let's finish by just thinking about some structure points. So enjambment is a line of poetry that continues into the next one without any punctuation. So I've got an example here. So in the poem where he says, I swear, there's nothing at the end of that line to move into this next one. And then again here later in the poem, then I'm home on leave, but I blink. And you can see there's no punctuation at the end of this line either. Just goes straight into the following line. So we could suggest that this enjambment shows that the speaker has got no control over their memory. He can't stop it from just flooding back into his mind whenever it wants. They feel completely powerless. So in poetry, it's really important to think about the punctuation and what it could show. In this case, this is what I think it shows. Maybe you've got a different interpretation. As long as you have the evidence there, you're all good. So it's over to you. Time to test your knowledge. I would like you to pick one of the essay questions below and answer it using the quotations that have been explored in the video. So firstly, how does Armitage present the soldier's guilt? How does Armitage convey the soldier's conflicting emotions? And finally, if you want to challenge yourself, to what extent is Armitage criticising the nature of war? Once you've done that, send them off to your teacher for some feedback and tune in for the next video.